In this parsha, we have Yaakov giving all the brachas to the various children, and two of the children receive an astonishing bracha: Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi Achim. They are brothers. They are men of war. They hold the vessels of war, and in this quote unquote bracha, Yaakov says, "Achalkem b'Yaakov afitzem b'Yisrael," that the tribes of Shimon and Levi are going to be cut up and split up and spread across the entire Eretz Yisrael and Bnei Yisrael. So the Mefarshim wonder exactly what is the meaning of this cutting up and splitting up these tribes. Levi, of course, does not have its own nachala, it does not have its own residential land in the land of Israel, but there are 48 cities in which Shevet Levi resides. Shimon also, although it has its nachala, but it is swallowed up inside the nachala of Yehuda. So, in a certain sense, these brothers are separated from one another. They are separated. They are separated and split up and sprinkled throughout the land, throughout the tribes of Israel. And although this is ordinarily understood as a punishment because of their extraordinary passion and the lack of judgment and inability to control their impulses, as evidenced by what they did with avenging their sister Dinah, who was raped. Nevertheless, many understand that this is actually a blessing, not a punishment. The fact that they were sprinkled throughout the land of Israel, the people of Israel, is meant to say that there's something special about Shimon and Levi, and that which needs to be, to influence and impact the entire body of Klal Yisrael. And what is that special thing? So some suggest it is the power of their passion, their unbridled passion, and it is that passion which must infiltrate every single tribe and every single individual within each tribe. And therefore, it is important for them to be spread out throughout the people of Israel, throughout Yisrael. Now, Rashi interestingly says, how was this accomplished, that they were spread throughout the land and the people of Israel? So Levi was, as we know from later on in the Torah, Levi is the recipient of trumos and maasros, the various tithes, and therefore the members of the tribe of Levi would have to go from town to town, from place to place, from granary to granary, to get their various tithes which were due to them. And by dint of their having to go from town to town to get their tithes from the Jewish farmers throughout Israel, they would perforce be spread throughout the land. That's how it was accomplished through Levi. Shimon, on the other hand, there was a different method in which Shimon was spread throughout the people of Israel, and that is that Shimon and Levi were the teachers, the elementary school teachers, the malamdim, the malamdei tinokos. And as malamdei tinokos, they were indigent, they were poor, and they had to go eke out a living from town to town, from place to place. And as a consequence, of their profession that was foisted upon them, being the malamdei tinokos, the elementary school teachers, and having to eke out a living. There weren't yeshivas, there weren't schools with tuition. They had to go and find their students and find the towns and find the people that were willing to pay. They basically had to go begging door to door, to find somebody that would support them as they were engaging in their professional duties. And so both Shimon and Levi, through two different methodologies, were spread throughout the people of Israel, throughout the land of Israel. Now, what's interesting to note is, if it is true that Shimon and Levi are called to this great calling to spread their passion throughout the people of Israel, well, how did they do? Levi seems to have done all right. We have plenty of instances of Levi and their remarkable leadership in subsequent generations. However, Shimon seems to be lost to history. Because by the time we get to Moshe Rabbeinu in Vizos HaBracha, Shimon isn't even included in the brachas that Moshe gives to the various tribes. It's as though Shimon has all but disappeared. Now, the Mefarshim in Vizos HaBracha struggle with the absence of Shimon in the brachas of Moshe to the tribes. Rashi says it's because Shimon sinned terribly with the immorality of the Benos Moab. Shimon played a very prominent role in the immoral behavior with the women of Moab, and therefore, as a consequence, he is erased from the brachas, from the blessings of Moshe. It's not that he's erased from history, but he's erased from the brachas. The Ibn Ezra says that Moshe was simply following Yaakov's lead, in that Yaakov seemingly cursed Shimon, and so Moshe just removes him from the blessings altogether. Now Levi was also cursed, apparently, seemingly, by Yaakov, but Levi had a patron in Aharon, and Aharon was too great for Moshe to just simply wave away and overlook the tribe of Levi. And finally, the Midrash Tehillim says that Shimon was blessed in the time of Moshe in Vizos HaBracha, and it is in the bracha of Yehuda where it says Shema Hashem, and that's hinted. Shema, Shin Mem Ayin, Shema Hashem, Shema. That is Shimon. That is Shimon's name. Shema Hashem, Shema. So I think that although there are various ways that the Mefarshim suggest or resolve Shimon's absence in Vizos HaBracha, perhaps the most compelling, answer would be that Shimon fell short of his mission. Shimon waned in his passion. The tribe of Shimon devolved and never met the grand goals that were set for Shimon. Levi with flying colors, but Shimon somehow just waned and all but disappeared. And the question then is why? If they disappeared in essence, and that is the reason for the absence in Moshe's bracha, well, what is the cause? There were two brothers, both with passion, both with a terrible anger, both given this mission, both spread across the various tribes. Why is it that by the time we get to Moshe Rabbeinu, Shimon is all but disappeared? And I think the answer is clear. Shimon and Levi had two different ways that they were dispersed amongst the nation. Levi was dispersed, says Rashi, in a dignified way. Every farmer had to give their tithes to the Levi, whoever the Levi would be. And so therefore, when the members of the tribe of Levi would go house to house and farm to farm, these were tithes that were due to the Bnei Levi. It was begging for sure, but there was some dignity in it, because all the trumos and maasros, the tithes, were already owed to the Levi, and the Levi was just coming to collect what was already his. Shimon, by contrast, had to go and eke out a living town to town, begging for somebody to support him, while they were doing their duty of educating the young children. And there's a lack of dignity in that. You have to go beg for your supper. It's somewhat demeaning and debasing. And at some point, it could have an impact on a person, and they could just feel just broken by it. And perhaps this is what happened to Shimon, and this is an important lesson. Shimon is faded into history not because he didn't have extraordinary capability, but because of the demeaning nature in which he had to conduct his day-to-day life, and that indignity took a toll. And finally, caused the tribe of Shimon to sort of just wither away under the weight of all those indignities. And it seems to me that this is an important lesson for us. Two brothers, similar capabilities, similar situation, One goes on to greatness, and one goes on, and one goes to the dustbin, virtually to the dustbin of history. One because they were treated with dignity, and one because they were treated with indignity. And for sure, most certainly, it is the obligation of every person to own their own dignity. But it is the obligation of we as a community to ensure that those around us, even especially those who are in a more weakened position, who need support, who need help, must always be treated and with dignity, and feel that they are treated with dignity. We need every Jew. Every Jew has a contribution to make. It is a tragedy, the loss of Shimon. We should not lose anyone else. Good Shabbos.